71-year-old Bernard Gore from Tasmania, known to his close friends as Butch, led an active life with his wife of 50 years, Angela. The retiree worked for many years as a bread delivery man and a barber. He would still give pro bono haircuts to his friend and family despite his advancing years. The elderly couple regularly visited the mainland to stay with their daughter Melinda in Wallara, and this was exactly what they decided to do to celebrate Christmas and New Year. The couple's stays in Wallara had become so regular that the two had developed a nice routine of having lunch in the food court of the local Westfield Bondi Junction shopping mall in Sydney. The food court had plenty of options and lots to enjoy. After the family had enjoyed Christmas and New Year together on January the 6th, 2017, Bernard and his wife left their daughter's apartment to go shopping at the Westfield Mall. They had lunch plans in mind like the pair had done on countless other occasions. Westfield Bondi Junction is a huge mall with over 300 stores spread over 6 floors. It's estimated that 20 million visitors pass in and out of it every year. However, the couple only ever frequented Zone A. They always used the same entrance, and they always took the same direct route from their daughters to the mall. Angela would often go shopping elsewhere, but the two would always meet in Westfield. This was because no matter what they wanted to eat, it pretty much had it on offer. That particular fateful morning, however, Angela had her heart set on shopping in the Westfield Junction itself, making everything a little easier to arrange. The family awoke early to rain and had a lazy morning watching television, before, luckily, the sun decided to make an appearance. The two originally planned to set off together, split and regroup, but with the rain slowing down their morning routine, and Bernard feeling a little impatient, they decided that he would leave first and then she would follow. Angela bid her husband goodbye, knowing that she would leave soon and join him shortly enough. They planned to meet and then eat at 1:15 p.m. outside of Woolworths. Then they would pick up a few groceries before heading back to their daughter's home. The walk to and from the mall was one they had taken many times before. There was no real cause for concern. This was just an ordinary, enjoyable day. On these trips, Bernard often accompanied his wife, but rarely went into any stores when they went to Westfield. He instead preferred to window shop. When Angela finally left about 20 minutes later, she was in good spirits. She was eager for a little retail therapy after the rain had spoiled their morning. There was probably some bargains to be had in the New Year sales. But little did Angela know, her husband would not be waiting outside Woolworths. Today, the routine would fall apart in the worst way imaginable. She quickly flew around the stores without a care in the world, buying a few bits and pieces here and there. And as 1:15 approached, she decided to head towards the food court to find Bernard. Arriving ever so slightly early, Angela was unfazed to find that Bernard wasn't already there, so she sat in their normal spot and waited for him to join her. Minutes passed slowly and Angela saw no sight of Bernard, but she knew that her husband often window shopped on his way, perhaps wandering and meandering, so she guessed that that's exactly what he was doing today. After a quarter of an hour passed, Angela decided to give Bernard a call. However, there was no answer. Once again, this didn't really set off any alarm bells. Bernard didn't always answer his phone. This wasn't out of character, and so rather than panicking at that moment in time, Angela was simply frustrated with her husband of 50 years. She did what most of us would probably do. She sat waiting, inventing a few scenarios in her head, assuming that Bernard had just been sidetracked by something in a shop window. Maybe some dark possibilities do pop into our heads, but we can normally bat them out of the way fast enough, convincing ourselves everything is okay. Whilst waiting, Angela called his mobile a few more times, but to no avail. And then, feeling slightly irked, she decided to go and look for him herself. Angela made sure to keep the food court in view as she did the round of the nearby stores that her husband liked, keeping an eye on their usual spot in case he arrived while she wasn't there. Angela started to become frustrated. She was almost ready to up and leave. Before that is, her thoughts began to turn to a previous instance. Although a diagnosis was up in the air, the family had recently begun to suspect that Bernard was showing signs of early-stage dementia. This was reported by doctors as something called mild cognitive impairment. Bernard had been forgetting small things here and there, and so there were clues that he might not be as sharp as he once was. The family had previously had to report him missing in Hobart, and there had been 1 or 2 occasions where locals had seen him sitting on benches, seeming a little lost or confused. His kids had even bought him a smartwatch. This was purely because it had GPS tracking. They loved their dad. They were concerned for him. The thought of him going walkabout again frightened them. However, frustratingly, the watch was broken, so as a backup, Melinda made him a card to carry. It had her name, address, and contact numbers. This was just a precaution on the off chance that something similar could happen again. With these events entering her mind, Angela's initial frustrations turned to concern for his whereabouts. Those darker thoughts started pushing their way back in. She called her daughter Melinda, and she confirmed her father hadn't returned since he had left the apartment before as planned. That was when Angela's concerns became full-on fear. Acting logically and rationally based on previous experience, she remained calm. She knew that her husband had eventually made his way back in similar circumstances, so she decided to stay put for a little longer, trusting he would make it to the food court or back to his daughter's place at some point in the near future. But sadly, Bernard would not show up at either location, and he wouldn't be seen again for 3 weeks. Angela took their usual route back from the mall to Melinda's. She hoped that she would bump into Bernard along the way. Perhaps he had just been sidetracked somehow, perhaps stopped to talk to someone, or maybe ventured into a shop. There was a chance he was sat somewhere slightly lost once again, much like he had been the time before in Hobart. Angela walked and frantically looked for him. She clung to these little possibilities to help keep her negative thoughts at bay. But Bernard was nowhere to be seen en route. And worryingly, she wasn't at Melinda's place when she arrived home at around 2 p.m. Still, he had always made it back before. Even if he was confused, logically they thought he would make it back to Melinda's. Whether he was to do this off his own back, or whether it would be through someone lending him a helping hand, maybe finding the card that the two had made with her details on it. So the mother and daughter waited. They waited as the family took turns searching between the apartment and the shopping mall. A total of 6 hours went by before the sun set and darkness came. This prompted them to report him as a missing person to the authorities. Police were notified at 7:59 p.m. They quickly broadcast a description of the man over nearby police radios at around 8:50 p.m. Melinda also returned to the mall to report the incident to security at 9:30 p.m. She explained how her parents were supposed to meet for lunch, but that her father hadn't arrived, and she gave them the same description. Only then could the family attempt to rest, hoping that the police or the mall would bring good news in the following hours. But the New South Wales police would have no news for the Gore family for the next 21 days. With a diagnosis of cognitive impairment and his disappearance in Hobart on record, the police sprang into action and began their search at the proposed rendezvous site, the Westfield Food Court. They also enlisted the mall security team to go through the copious amounts of camera footage. But this was the first major hurdle where it would seem efforts to locate Bernard fell short. Being such a large mall, there were hundreds of cameras with different angles to review. The police believed it was best to keep their officers' boots on the ground. That meant they could proactively continue the manhunt. Scrubbing through the CCTV was down to the mall security. Time was passing quickly and Bernard was considered vulnerable. The Westfield security team logically began by looking at entrances and exits, as well as areas surrounding Woolworths and the food court itself. Police officers reviewed some of this footage, the cameras which covered entrances and exits surrounding Woolworths. But were they doing a thorough enough job? Only time could give us that answer. The mall was vast. This meant that the security team was huge, with many shift changes. Each shift passed a footage review onto the next. Lack of a proper plan or organisation, in hindsight, hindered the investigation. Nevertheless, the security team did follow the protocols in place, and they continued their search for Bernard in the complex the next day in addition to their regular duties as best as they could. Meanwhile, the police focused on his last known whereabouts, and in getting Bernard's description and image out to the public as quickly and effectively as possible. They hoped the information would ring a bell and a witness would come forward. Bernard was reported as wearing a red and black check shirt. It said he wore long dark pants hiding his pajamas underneath. He was purportedly carrying just $30 Australian, along with his transport Opal card, and of course the makeshift address card Melinda had given him. In a statement to the press, Gore's son Mark described his father as strong and resilient, and perhaps a little too proud, saying, "My father would not want to bother anyone if he was lost, and I think it's unlikely that he'd approach a stranger for help." He then went on to share that while his father's character may have prevented him from approaching others, he hoped that someone may have noticed him alone or offered him some help that day. If so, he urged them to contact the police. Reviewing the mall security footage was quickly deemed a dead end. No one matching Gore's description was seen entering or exiting the complex, and so it was concluded that the 71-year-old had never even arrived at the mall, a conclusion that was based on a less than thorough review. This at least gave the police officers an idea of where not to focus. It is worth mentioning though, the initial reviews of the footage were without a photograph of Bernard to compare it to, and as we know, the review of the footage was passed from pillar to post, and there was no real system of pinpointing which cameras had or hadn't been checked. Each staff member simply told the next shift that they hadn't successfully located Bernard yet. However, Bernard had in fact made it to the Westfield Mall. He was at one point just feet away from his destination, striving to make his lunch date with his wife. Police officers were assured that Bernard wasn't there, so they focused their efforts elsewhere. And knowing what I know now, this is so frustrating. Things like this honestly make me wish for a time machine. Police widened the search area, checking everywhere within walking distance, and the family too continued to scour his usual routes, trying to spot anything that might have taken his attention that day and led him astray. It must have been unimaginably tough for everyone involved. The anguish of just not knowing what possibly could have happened to Bernard, and over such a frustratingly short distance. For them, it just didn't make sense. And to be honest, I know for you, the viewer, it doesn't make much sense either. Here is what actually happened. CCTV of the area showed him making his way to meet Angela following their usual route, passing all the normal places without any stops or detours. So Bernard hadn't gone missing en route. He made it to the food court after all. This meant that Bernard did feature on the CCTV footage from the mall. However, the disorganized nature of the operation meant that he was missed in those crucial early moments of the investigation. However, quite bizarrely, although Bernard was seen going into the mall, somehow no footage existed of Bernard ever leaving again. The mystery only grew deeper. On January the 27th, 21 days after his wife and daughter last saw him, the tragic reality of what had happened to Bernard was finally discovered. The Westfield Junction Mall encompasses an extensive subset of passageways. These link its 6 floors and utilities behind the scenes. It was on that day that a maintenance worker entered a staff-only passageway. The majority of these corridors are rarely used. They have no windows and they form an 8-mile labyrinth. If you don't know how to navigate your way around as well as a maintenance man did, you could easily get lost, disorientated, or worse. The maintenance worker entered the passageway. He was there following reports of a bad smell by surrounding store staff. He entered via doorway L407, one of many which opened freely if you entered from the mall, but they for some reason required a key to exit. It was there in a badly lit nearby stairwell that the worker thought he could see some equipment obstructing the passage, so he went further in to investigate. As he approached, the smell became stronger. He thought perhaps it was some garbage that had been ditched in the hallway. But agonizingly, he soon realized that what he could see, positioned by an abandoned chair, was not discarded stock. It wasn't equipment or rubbish as he suspected, but instead, it was Bernard. He was lifeless and slumped over. Police arrived and a coroner was called. Angela and the Gore family finally learned of Bernard's whereabouts. The shocking discovery called the management of the manhunt into question. Unsurprisingly, an inquiry needed to get to the bottom of how exactly this could have happened, how Bernard came to be in the staff-only zone, and just how it had taken so long to find him there. The coroner concluded that Mr. Gore passed some time between the 6th and 9th of January, but the cause was undetermined. One could only imagine what Bernard Gore, Butch, had gone through before meeting his end. New South Wales Deputy State Coroner Derek Lee, remember him, echoes that sentiment in his inquiry statement. He said, "The distress that Bernard must have felt after 12:50 p.m. on the 6th of January 2017, and the uncertainty and anguish that his family must have felt in the hours, days and weeks that followed is unimaginable. The staff corridors that became his tomb had no cell phone reception. You could never get a clear signal, and many of the doors were simply unopenable. It must have been terrifying to endure, and the consequences were deadly." Frustratingly, there was an exit 1 floor below where he was recovered, but Bernard hadn't been lucky enough to find it. Under a scrutinized review of security footage, Bernard can be seen entering the mall, and he can be seen visiting the food court, and there he can be seen looking for his wife just minutes before her arrival. But then, rather than taking a seat for lunch, Bernard appeared confused, and he is then seen entering the staff-only area via L407. The electronic access records show that nobody entered that staff area between the 6th and the 27th of January. Bernard's location within the labyrinth was behind the Chanel store. A female member of staff from that store believed she had the final interaction with Bernard before he vanished. She told Australian news outlets The Daily Telegraph, "A frail old man who looked confused and disoriented kept pacing up and down outside the store. He said he couldn't find his car or people he was supposed to be meeting. I asked him if he needed help and he shook his head. He was a little dazed and walked off. We were worried about him, so my colleague called security and one of the guards told us they could check CCTV footage to locate him. I don't know if it was him, but it could be anyone's dad or granddad. The thought that he might be the man in the stairwell, and he has been there ever since, makes me feel so sad. Why has it taken so long to find the body?" Entrance L407 is located next to the Chanel store, so this all adds up. Bernard could have been so close to being saved. Devastatingly, it was later heard during the inquest into Bernard's unfortunate demise that during the evening of January the 9th, a senior police briefing took place. During the briefing, one sergeant recalled a previous missing persons incident at the complex, where on that occasion, someone had managed to make their way into the maze of stairwells the mall held within its walls. If someone had checked up on that possibility, Bernard may have been, or almost certainly would have been, rescued from his ordeal in good time. However, the police assumed that the security staff had included them in their building sweeps as part of their search protocol. That was obviously not the case, so nobody found Bernard for 21 days. One can't say for certain the state of mind that he was in, or how long he looked for an escape, but it is likely from the position he was found in that he sat in the chair waiting for help in his final hours, trapped in the dark, confused and scared, wondering why his wife didn't meet him in the food court, just feet away from thousands of people living their lives in the mall. A stark reminder that life really does go on until your time is up.